If we are very engaging and have good conversations with our kids while they're still adult. So I hope we had more people. We had a good PowerPoint slides. We would have loved to have more people, but I'm happy that if we could bring a change in even a single person's life, that would be amazing. And yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So when we say domestic violence, a lot of times we think about physical violence, and that's definitely part of domestic violence, but we also know that domestic violence can show up in other ways in our relationships. One other thing that I want to highlight is that sometimes in our homes and in our communities, this can be a tremendous source of strength for many of us, but sometimes it means that the violence is not between the husband and the wife at all. And there might be other people in the home that might be the ones that are the source of some of the unhealthy behaviors. And so that does make it a little challenging. We also find that sometimes there are adult children, and the abuse is directed from an adult child to an elder parent, which I know sometimes it's surprising to us because we, in many ways, have grown up in a way where we were taught to respect elders. But you know, we live in a very different space and environment now, and there's a lot of stressors, and a lot of elders are dependent on adult children as they transition to this new country as well. So that's another type of violence that we see in families, right, where adult children are abusive towards the elders in the home. And certainly this is not new information to any one of you, but we see that sometimes in-law relations can be problematic, and there might be abuse in the home that shows up not from a partner or spouse, but from somebody else that either is physically present in the home or has influence in the way decisions are being made at home, right? And so they're able to perpetuate that type of violence or unhealthy habits. You know, we always say sometimes, and when I grew up in Pakistan, I grew up in a home that was supportive, and but we didn't talk a lot about what healthy relationships looked like, right? And we didn't talk a lot about having boundaries and how do you even keep those boundaries in place. For those of you that have children, you know, of course, sometimes we'll tell our kids, hey, you know, give a hug to this relative of yours, right? And that's great. We want to teach them about sort of the value of being connected to an extended family and a community. But what do you do when that child is showing some discomfort with that? And there could be no real reason. It's not that that person has treated them badly, but when we're forcing them to go ahead and do what it is that we want them to do in that social interaction, we're basically saying that what you think and feel in this moment doesn't matter, right? And so you are not allowed to have an opinion or a feeling, and hence not a right to say no, like I'm not comfortable with this, right? So there's a couple different ways this can play out. One, it could be that they just become socially conditioned to not understand that they can say no, whether it's physical interactions or other interactions with someone else, and never learn. It's hard to say no, right? As adults, you know, if somebody's saying, can you do this for me, or can you help me with this, we have a difficult time saying no. But if we've taken that away from our children completely, then it's gonna be hard for them to say no when the time comes, right? And that can be, you know, I always say it's sometimes uncomfortable for us to talk about this, but sexual violence can, you know, 1 in 9 young boys, 1 in 4 young girls will experience and be exposed to this, right? So it's uncomfortable for us, and we want to hope that, inshallah, this would never happen to our children, but we also know that we're not able to be with our children all the time. And so it is important for them to recognize and have those boundaries and feel comfortable to tell you if someone has crossed a boundary with them, right? So again, the conversations around healthy relationships and is so important because, and we're doing this every single day, right? So how do you, of course we have to have expectations and boundaries and goals for our children. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't take decision-making completely away from them, right? How do we do it in a way so that they feel like they're part of this discussion? And these are the goals and objectives and rules of the family, but also that they're part of that. And they're allowed to opt out of certain things if it's not feeling good for them. I want to pause and see if Khushbu wants to add anything.
Yes. Something that I was just thinking to tack on to what Zara is talking about is discussing a little bit of what economic or financial abuse can also look like. So this is also, unfortunately, something that we see that has to do with, let's say that someone is keeping your legal documents, like your passport or your papers, and you're not able to have access to it. If you are not allowed to work, if your work authorization papers are kept away from you. Another example is like not having any access to money that you're making. These are also all forms of financial abuse that have become normalized, and that's something that we also want to shed light on. And then I think that another type of abuse that we talk about a lot, especially when I'm talking with young folks, Zara mentioned that not all abuse is physical. And I think an important thing to highlight is like emotional abuse. If someone is belittling you, or if someone is, threatening you or saying mean things to you constantly, making you feel as if you have no value, as if you don't contribute anything. These are also forms of violence because they hurt your heart and your soul. And those are also important things to think about and to keep track of if they might be happening to anyone you love.
Often when we talk about emotional abuse or financial abuse, it's hard to understand, right? So if you feel like you're in a healthy relationship where you're part of the decision making, even if you're not working, or if one person does drive some of those decisions, it's really sort of this idea of control and is there, sometimes we do get asked that, hey, we have a home where one person works and makes a lot of the financial decisions, right? So just because that's happening doesn't mean that it is there is domestic violence. It's just for us to know that when domestic violence happens, it's usually not one incident. It's a cycle of incidents, and it's a little bit of all of these forms of abuse, right? So even if there's no physical abuse, but there's emotional abuse, and sometimes that can extend to people that you care about, threats that are, to the safety of someone that is important to you, or like Khushbu was saying, around financial decisions or not having access to your work permit or passport. It really is, we think about it in sort of, in the form that it's usually not an isolated incident. If it is domestic violence, there is an escalation often that happens, and there's more than one incident that happens. One thing that I also want to say is that in many of our communities, we've done well, right? We're educated. We find that our communities are doing well economically. And I'll say that that's actually not a protective factor against domestic violence. So many people that we work with, we've worked with professors at UT, with folks that own hotels. Just because you're educated or have done well doesn't actually make it that you are not going to experience this violence, or that can't happen in this family because everyone's a doctor or engineer, right? So it does happen in all of our families, and socioeconomic stability and educational levels aren't actually protective factors. The one trend that we see that social scientists have tracked is that if you witnessed abuse or as a child, you're more likely to either accept abuse if it's happening to you as an adult, or utilize abuse in a relationship that you entered, right? So that's why I said our kids are watching us, right? And the way those interactions are playing out, that's a factor that does actually make it so that that is something that's end up being a part of their life. Should we switch slides? Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Another thing I just wanted to say is that not to feel as if we only talk to Muslim communities or talk to masjids. We all grew up Muslim, but this is something that happens across religion, across race, across all of these factors. And that's one of the reasons why we work with such a broad array of people and people of all religious backgrounds, because this happens everywhere. And it's important for us to have these discussions, even though they're difficult and they're uncomfortable oftentimes.
So I think as a community, a lot of times if someone's experienced anything bad, but certainly if they're experiencing relationship violence or domestic violence, we have a 24-hour hotline that they can call, and they can call in any language, and we'll share information for that. But someone is much more likely to reach out to one of you that they know and trust, right? So a lot of people will reach out to their imam or to a sister that they are close to in a community setting like this. So even if this has never happened to you before, or you don't find yourself in that position, which is many of us, we know that somebody, when they're experiencing this, will reach out to somebody that they trust and love. And so you having some understanding of what their options are, what are some ways that you can support them, what services you can connect them with, is important, because usually people don't want to reach out to somebody that doesn't know them or doesn't know their family. They want to see if there's someone in the community or their extended circle of friends and family that can provide some support. So that's a really important reason why we talk to communities and community leaders, because chances are that you're the first line of response, right? That people are reaching out to you, asking you questions, and there are many unique barriers that we see in certainly Muslim communities, but Asian communities in general, and in immigrant communities, right? That whether that is language access, whether that is this idea of shame, how like if I ask for help now, I'm bringing shame to my family. Those are all very unique in the way that they play out in our communities. And I think that as a community, we can challenge that, right? So is it the person that's being abused? Is that the person that should feel shame? Or is it the person that's using violence in that space, right? And we have the power as a community to do some of that, support the victim, but then also, recognize that that an abuser is someone that should be the one that experiences a little bit of community accountability, right? And it shouldn't be that only people that are the survivors or victims of this violence feel like they have to feel and bear the burden of shame. One other thing that we find is that many people in our communities are small and closely knit communities, and that's wonderful, right? But if there is an incident of family violence, sometimes people feel like they'll be ousted from the community, right? Like nobody's gonna wanna associate with me, nobody's gonna wanna, associate with my children. And in many cases, this is the community where people look for care and love and support, right, from each other, because we have so much in common. And so that's another reason why people are not coming forward and asking for help, because they don't want to be, the black sheep of the community. They don't want to lose all the social support that they get from this space, right? So I think as we normalize these conversations, I think people hopefully feel some comfort in saying that the imam or Sheikh Mohsen is somebody that I can trust and talk to when I'm experiencing this, or when I want someone to connect me to a resource, right? Because at the end of the day, this community is really important to everybody that's part of that community. And as we become more comfortable talking about this, hopefully if people are experiencing this type of relationship violence or interpersonal violence, they feel more comfortable stepping up and saying, hey, someone tell me, who I can speak to, because this is what I've been experiencing for however long. So I think that we have unique barriers that our communities face, but we also have unique strengths, right? There aren't a lot of communities like ours that'll show up for each other. that will, whether it's financial support or other things, that are really committed to caring about and supporting each other. So I think that there's a lot of strength in that. And as we become more comfortable talking about these types of issues, we can show up for survivors in a way that, it just creates comfort that, hey, yes, this is something I can talk about in this space.
So at this time, I'm hoping that if anyone who has any questions feels comfortable asking us anything that they might be wondering or anything they might want to hear more about. Oh, let me give you the mic, maybe. Are you comfortable with that? Okay, sure. Just so we can all hear you.
So thank you for coming and for the lovely presentation. I have two questions. One is, what does your foundation do? And my second question is, I saw one of the slides about the demography of, I guess, domestic violence, and have you seen what's going on in our community here?
So the first one we can definitely answer very easily. I have a nice slide that shows what our agency does. So we do a range of things. We have different teams. We have a direct service team that works directly with survivors, and they do all kinds of support, like legal support, economic support, if someone is needing housing support, peer counseling. What other services do we provide for our survivors? Therapy and other healing services. If part of that for the survivor looks like having religious support, we also try to accommodate for that. And so that's just one branch of what we do, our direct service. Then we also do crisis intervention and advocacy services. We do long-term case management, so the survivors that we have, we serve them for life. It's not something that, you only have our support for like a few months, or when you're out of immediate crisis. It's something that you will have access to forever. We will be there for you for your whole life, because things can come up later in life, and you might need that support again in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and so forth. We also provide support for the entire family, if that's something that people are seeking. And we do community education and outreach, which is part of what we're doing today. So that's what the foundation does. And then I think your other question was, you wanted to see the demographics, right? And if we've seen this happen in our communities.
So we don't have the data pulled up, but so out of all the clients we served, last year we served close to 300 clients, or just over 300 clients, and 11% of the clients are Latino or Hispanic, and outside of that we serve a really large chunk of Asian clients. We've historically served, we can share some data of course as well later, but we serve a large segment of South Asian clients. We were in fact founded 30 years ago by a group of South Asian women that were working at a local shelter, and they realized that nobody from our communities was coming forward to get help. And so they started this organization. So our roots are South Asian, but we now serve a Pan-Asian audience. And I can tell you with a lot of confidence that we see clients from all of the communities that you might imagine, including the mosque. We worked very closely with Sheikh Umair when he was alive, and he was really supportive of our mission and our work. And we've had close relationships with some congregational leaders, because we find that in our communities that's somebody that people trust and look to for support and spiritual guidance, particularly as they're experiencing something so traumatic. So that's also really core to our work. We partner with MCSS and some other Muslim-facing organizations as well. But again, we certainly see a lot of, one of our largest served languages over the last 5 years was Arabic. So again, as we see sort of new folks coming and settling in Austin as well, like we've served folks in a lot of different languages. 2021, we served folks in 39 languages. And so there were a lot of Asian languages, but we also see a lot of folks from immigrants and refugees from Africa, many that are Muslim as well, so North Africa, West Africa. So again, just a really broad segment of community. And like Khushbu was saying, the services are very client-led and community-led. So for our client services, sometimes people are just looking for some support, and sometimes they'll become clients, and some of the other things that we help around are family law or immigration law that someone might be sort of experiencing as they're in these situations. But the other piece about community-led, like we've had a lot of conversations, certainly about domestic violence and healthy relationships, but also how do you disrupt sort of some of these cycles of violence in our communities, right? Our people experience violence as we interact with a lot of other people, and how does that shape the trauma, the collective trauma that we carry? And also, how are we going to sort of have conversations that move us forward, right? And that includes sort of just the way that we interact with each other. And so we've done a lot of sessions around parenting, right? How do you have healthy communication with your children? A lot of times, if you have children that are, second-gen American, they're American, and parents have held on to values that they brought from their home countries. And how do you navigate that, right? It's not that one is right or wrong, but that we live in a complex world where our experiences are complicated. And so a lot of our education is around talking to young people, but also talking to caretakers and people that that are supporting these young people on how to make those healthy decisions. And some of the other things that we've talked about are internet safety and bullying and what are recourses. We say that violence is a learned behavior, and you can experience violence in a lot of different ways, right? So it's not uncommon that we'll see that young people from our communities are experiencing bullying in school, and so that's something that can become internalized behavior and impact the way that we have interactions and relationships in the future. So it's not just that we see violence in our homes. Certainly that's part of it, but there are other ways that young people interact with violence, and how do you talk about those so that they are able to kind of validate their own experience, but then also learn from it and break that cycle for themselves and for those that'll come after them. Very long answer, but I hope we got to the core of what you were saying.
I just wanted to add something quickly that, something that we see often in our work is that people think that victims of this kind of violence or people going through this kind of violence or abuse are only women. I want to say that we see people of all genders. Men can also be abused, men can also experience this kind of violence. It is not something that is unique to women. And that's something that we also want to highlight. And we've seen people of all genders as our clients, as people who want some extra support, etc. And I think someone else had a question. Do you have a question, sister? No? Okay. Mm-hmm. How to deal with something like that? Okay. How to deal with rumors being spread.
I think that's the power of community, right? I think that as all of us, as we're hearing things about each other, really, again, nothing on the news that we see is true these days, right? We have to engage with information critically, and we have the power of intellect as ashraful makhlukat, and we have to utilize that as we're processing information. And so as a community, if we're hearing things about each other that we have no way to know if it's true or not, I think thinking about it before both believing it and certainly before sharing that information with somebody else is really important. I always say I strongly believe in the power of community, and I think community can really come together around somebody who is going through a rough time and carry them through, right? But sometimes we see the negative, the underbelly of that as well, where because we're all so close and we're small communities, we know everything about each other, and that makes it so that if there is something that I'm experiencing that others know, then maybe I don't want to come to the mosque, right? Because I feel like people are talking about me and and not in a good way, right? So I think I always say that as leaders within this community, I think we can build a culture where we are caring and loving and knowing that we don't know what the truth is, and maybe it's best not to share that or weigh in. And if you are aware of resources that family needs, and those rumors can be, this family has lost a lot of money in their business, right? And that doesn't feel good if someone's talking about that, if you're experiencing that hard time. If you have a resource, share that resource. And short of that, I think just really thinking hard about believing or even sharing that along with anyone else is what I would say. I know there was one other question. I think you had a question?
Would you like the mic? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a simple question. I know someone who divorced. Now she's mentally abnormal because I saw her a few times in Lakeline Mall area and doing something like that, like so for this type of female, for this type of female is mentally normal anymore after she got divorced. So she lost her child. I mean, they are under the dad custody. It's a very bad situation. I think she is right now just simply homeless.
Thank you for that question. Yeah. So one thing that we definitely do see as an effect of domestic violence, or, I don't know what her situation is. It could be anything. Could be nothing related to abuse at all. We don't know, and it's good not to assume. But people, struggle with their mental health for an array of reasons. And I think that there's a lot that we can do as a community to come together and support someone who's struggling that way. Personally, I've worked with a lot of people who've been on the streets, who've been homeless or houseless. And I think that even simple conversations, like going up to them or, asking how they are or how their day is going, can help to feel like they still have value, that they still have someone who cares about them or, is thinking about them or is noticing them. And I think that even, things that might appear small like that are very big. And that can be even first steps at making sure that, someone is able to carry on with their life after something very difficult that, unfortunately could happen to any one of us.
I just add one thing. So we have a 24-hour hotline, and if someone can get to this person and get them to call the hotline, they possibly would be eligible for all of our services. So we have long-term case management services that includes services around mental health and any other needs that they might have, including economic independence, right? Because it could be that they're houseless partially because they are not able to be economically whatever. So again, we'll leave our hotline information, but yes, all of our services might be helpful to them and they might be eligible. So if you know somebody that can get our hotline information to them and get them to call our hotline, they will be connected to services. And our advocates have served and even currently serve clients that are houseless. And so that's absolutely something that we do, and please connect them to our hotline. That's the number, 1877. Yes, it's AFSSAustin.org. What's your number? 1-877-281-8371. Thank you.
Jazakallah to the sisters for doing an excellent presentation. May Allah reward you. Okay, inshallah.